More insight into the Syrian crisis. We're joined by Anton Fedyashin. He's the director of the Carmel Institute of Russian Culture. Why don't we start with her report? Ash Carter's, the Pentagon saying the Russians are going after the wrong guys.
Yeah, it's a very interesting statement, which we just heard, because the actual statement is that it sounded like probably the Russians were bombing. In other words, the Pentagon has no idea what's going on the ground, and I think very few people do. And so we'll just have to wait and see over the next few days and weeks about the accuracy of Russia's bombing campaign.
Let me ask you this. Is this a double standard in a sense if they're calling out Russia for targeting other targets than ISIS? Given the fact that Turkey, when they entered this thing, a large majority of their sorties, their initial sorties, they were going after the PKK, and people started clamoring about it. In fact, I looked up this headline from The Guardian. This came out just a couple of months ago. It read, "The West is betraying the Kurds and allowing them to be massacred. Stabs in the back don't get much nastier than this." We didn't hear a lot of clamoring at that time, did we?
Well, no, we didn't. And the Russians know about this double standard, and they're not terribly worried because at least they know that if they are planning on hitting forces that are anti-Assad, they are certainly not forces that have contributed nearly as much to the anti-IS effort as the Kurds actually have in the northern part of the country.
Let me ask you about the developments on the diplomatic front of late. We saw Obama and Putin not looking all that happy, shaking hands and having their 90-minute meeting. Prior to that, though, Netanyahu traveled to Moscow, met with Putin. It seems like there's a lot of stuff going on behind closed doors. What do we read into all of this?
Well, it looks like Putin is actually putting together a coalition of his own. Netanyahu was one of them. Erdogan was another. The Iraqis have now signed up for an intelligence sharing operation. The Russians are quietly putting together countries that are beginning to see their point of view on the conflict. The Western strategy has failed completely to stem ISIS. Everyone's clear about that. And now the Russians are trying to fight ISIS with the Syrians behind their back. And I think the overall strategy is that the air support from Russia is supposed to coincide with troops on the ground, which no one's willing to commit except for Assad's own army. And that seems to be the only force that's capable of actually doing the fighting on the ground in Syria today.
Now, the U.S., of course, has gone to Iraq, has gone to Afghanistan. Of course, we mentioned that Russia, the Soviet Union, invaded Afghanistan. That was the last time we saw this type of action. You can get kind of bogged down. This is not an easy area to navigate. Are there certain concerns you think Putin may have at this
stage? Absolutely. I mean, the biggest concern for the Russians is to prevent being pulled into the Syrian hinterland and having to fight there. But so far, the Russians have not committed enough troops to even think about any kind of ground operations. And so far, they are counting on the Syrian army to do the footwork while the Air Force, the Russian Air Force, is doing the work from above. But whether that works, we'll see. What we know for sure is that nothing else has worked so far. So the Russians are trying something new.
Finally, we've got about 20 seconds. Kerry Lavrov, the meeting, what's your takeaway from that?
Well, it looks like Kerry made a statement today about the fact that the U.S. is now considering a transition period for Assad. This is radically different from what it's been saying 2-3 years ago. So the U.S. is quietly coming over to the Russian side of leaving Assad for now, dealing with ISIS, and then letting the Syrians decide their future later.
Anton Fedyashin, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming in.